Our first speaker this morning, our keynote speaker, Baroness Valerie Amos, took part by video. Valerie is with us this morning again, and it's my pleasure to introduce her to you. Valerie is a member of the House of Lords. She is, I think, in my view, without doubt, the senior Black educationist in our country. And she's held all sorts of roles, working for the UN for a while, working as the first director of SOAS, the first Black director of SOAS, I think the first woman director of SOAS as well. Currently, she is the Master of University College in Oxford. Not only the first woman to occupy that position, but the first Black leader ever to lead any Oxford college. Valerie has worked at inclusion all of her life and is an inspiration to so many. Valerie, it's wonderful to have you with us this morning. And let me say this as I hand over to you. There's a little lad that I've known, I won't mention his name, from when he was 5 or 6. And I talked with his mum just last Sunday. She's a member of the Oasis Church that I'm part of. And I've watched this little lad grow from the age of 5. Then he came to an Oasis school. And this September, he went to Oxford as a student. And his mum said to me just last Sunday morning, this is because of Oasis, and it's because of Valerie Amos and an Amos bursary that he had. So Valerie, welcome. We're looking forward to what you have to say to us. Everyone, there's going to be lots of chance to ask Valerie questions, so put them into the Q&A as we go. But Valerie, you're welcome. And we are so grateful for you being with us this morning. Over to you.
Steve, thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you for asking me to say a few words by way of introduction to the conference this morning. And I'm someone who is steeped, as you know, in education and learning. So it's no surprise that I'm passionate about education and what it can do. There have been generations of teachers in my family, including my grandfather, my parents, my sister. One of my nephews is currently a teacher. I have aunts who were teachers. And I've seen through the work that they did, but also in my own work in development and work that I have done in humanitarianism with the UN, work I did when I was International Development Secretary, when I worked in foreign affairs, but also since I've been more steeped in higher education, I have seen the difference that education can make. I have visited some of the poorest countries in the world. I've visited countries which have been mired in conflict. In all of those situations, parents have wanted their children to continue to go to school. And I have seen schools which have basically been groups of children with a teacher, or indeed several groups of children with a teacher under a tree, for example. But education really does have a transformative impact. Just something like educating girls, just a primary level in a developing country, means that those girls will have healthier families, their children are more likely to go to school. And just think about if those young women then had an opportunity to go on to secondary and tertiary education, what difference that would make. The lack of access to education stymies aspiration, it stymies ambition, and quite frankly, it means that societies can't grow in the way that they should. It's a waste of talent, and it impoverishes families, it impoverishes communities, it impoverishes societies. And when I make the contrast between those countries I've seen, those parents and those young people who are hungry for resources, hungry for any kind of access to education, I look at the UK, I look at the resources at our disposal, and the tragedy that we still live in a society which offers opportunity with one hand, but exclusion and inequality on the other. And that's why the work that you do here at Oasis, the work that other charities do, including the Amos Bursary, which I co-founded with my sister Colleen, that's why our work is so important. Because what do? We challenge the assumptions about our young people. We help them to create their own narrative, which is about fostering excellence, it's about aspiration, crucially, it's about inclusion. But we don't only do that, because we challenge the institutions themselves, the schools, the colleges, the universities, to find new ways of working, which will help to transform culture, stamp out discrimination, truly behave in a way that is anti-racist. It's about representation. Who's teaching? Who are in senior positions? What are the values? What is taught and how? Who are the role models? And how can you get access to everything that that institution can offer? It's about recognizing that racism takes many, many forms, and we have to deal with all of them. It's about giving our young people the tools that they need to succeed. A society where we see the intersection of different forms of discrimination and tackling that. For example, that crucial intersection between gender, race, and socio-economic disadvantage. But it's about giving our young people the confidence, the power to appreciate and understand their own relevance and their own importance. It's about making sure that there are role models throughout society that they can look at and aspire to. It's about skills development. It's about creating those networks that will help them to grow, and about giving them the skills that they need. But it's also about having a more joined up approach. One of the things that really, really frustrates me is that we think about education as sitting in its own little box. Sometimes we think about parts of education as sitting in their boxes. But education, of course, links to other areas of society. We have to make that commitment to lifelong learning that we talk about a reality. Charities like ours need to be more joined up. Let's not work in isolation, because we need to force agencies and government organizations to be more joined up themselves. It's not just about formal education in terms of early years, primary, secondary, tertiary education. It's about how those institutions and how that development and growth links to other areas of our society. Our young people don't live in a narrow world. The kind of injustices we see in our criminal justice system, in housing, in the way that communities get access to resources, all of that has an impact. But it's also about the way that education is structured. We've seen too many changes in the way that education is structured in our country. Why is it that we have free basic education for everyone, but our children can still leave school without the basic skills that they need to get on in our society? Imagine the frustration of that and the negative impact on their life chances. But this is a crucial moment, I think. It's one of significant challenge, and you, Steve, you spoke to some of those in your introduction, but there are also opportunities. And I think it's a moment in which we can create opportunities for change as well. Let's not just sit back and wait and see what happens. We need to point out what's been slow to change, where we've been complacent. But we can also use the call for change around the world, for example, as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd, to tap into that recognition that change is needed more than ever before. that organizations that didn't think they needed to deal with this agenda have suddenly woken up, know they have to deal with it, but quite frankly, don't know how. And the pandemic has brought significant negative impact on our young people as well. Less time in school, that has led to some mental health challenges for some of our young people, but it's also meant that they have fallen behind in their education. But the over-dependence on teacher assessment, which didn't necessarily serve children of colour well, that has also been a challenge. But at the same time, schools have had to look at different ways of teaching and learning. They've had to look at the resources they have had at their disposal. They've had to open up, look in different places for those resources and ways of keeping our young people engaged. How can we capitalize on that? How can we challenge current cultural orthodoxies? These are all questions that I'm sure that you will be thinking through today. I really hope that you have an enjoyable conference. And one of the things that I know that will happen out of this is that the resources, the learning resources that OASIS puts at every one's disposal, those resources will be added to and expanded as a result of the crucial issues and the solutions that you come up with today. So Steve, back to you.
Thank you, Valerie. Thanks for that. So we've already got some questions, but before we go to, I just wondered if I could ask you about your personal journey. I'd urge anybody who's not Googled or whatever, Valerie, you should do that, because as people do that, Valerie, they'll just see just how significant your contribution has been, not just in our country, but around the world. As you've pursued that, you've been a trailblazer, haven't you? You must have come across barrier after barrier. How have you found the strength to battle through that? And what advice would you give to others?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that, family, community, the support that you get from your friends is incredibly important. I think that my resilience comes from that crucial support that I get from my family. They have been with me throughout. As I said, my parents were both teachers. Education was really important to them. It's important to the rest of the family, and they were always there to help to pick up the pieces. I think it's always important to know your battles. We can't fight every single one. So which ones are we going to prioritize as individuals, and how are we going to form partnerships and alliances with other people who want the same sorts of things that we do. And I think it's really important to know yourself, know what's important to you, know what your bottom line is as you try to negotiate your way through a society that's challenging and difficult and quite frankly not fair in all sorts of ways. What is it? What is your inner core strength that is going to keep you moving? It doesn't come easily. There is a lot of hard work involved, but there are also huge benefits. I'm somebody that's interested in finding solutions to change, and that's what I look for all the time.
You talked about a joined up approach to education, and as you were chatting, you said it's not just what you do in school, it's a much bigger thing than that. So a couple of aspects of that. Just this morning in the news, we were hearing one of the stories that seemed to break in spite of the dominance of the Ukrainian situation, was about government announcing in this coming week that they want more emphasis on maths and English, and education is speaking out. I was listening to Radio 4 and saying, actually, we need a broader curriculum that equips young people for the whole of life. What's your comment on that, particularly for those who have felt excluded? Because you said inclusion is such an important issue.
Yeah, I do feel that we always keep going back when we look at educational attainment, and we don't seem to be doing as well as a country or as individual schools. We don't seem to be doing as well as others, or indeed other countries in the world. And then we go back to, there's a sort of knee-jerk reaction that says, well, we've got to go back and we need to do better at maths and English. Well, you know, our lives are not just defined by maths and English. Of course, it's important that we do well in maths and English. They're core things. And as I said, it continually staggers me that we have so many resources in our system and our young people will leave not even having some of those core skills. But I think it means that there are some questions that we have to ask ourselves about who's doing the teaching, how are they doing it, are we supporting our teachers enough, is the curriculum broad enough to keep our young people interested in what they're doing? You know, to what extent are we teaching a sense of, you know, broader civic responsibility and how you negotiate some quite difficult challenges in the world? I think that our young people have a lot that they have to confront and face, which also includes, you know, the positives and the negatives that come with living in a much faster techno world with the internet and social media and everything else. So I'm always pushing for things that are a more joined up education that challenges our young people to think, to explore, where they're able to discuss ideas as well as getting some of the basic skills.
A change of tack here. Someone said, you mentioned just now the importance of having an inner core strength. And they've said, can Valerie tell us about some examples of when she's needed that to hang on to that sense of inner strength?
I think it happens to us all the time in our working lives. And as I've become more senior in organizations, I have had to use it on many occasions when I've been thinking about, okay, you know, there's a moment here where people are trying to push me off track in a whole variety of ways, when you've just had to go back to what is it you're trying to achieve and why, and really use that knowledge that you have of how our society functions, how discrimination functions, what the impact of it is on our young people, to really try and push through an agenda that you know will be positive for them, but which an organization is not necessarily going to like, and sometimes it takes time.
Before you spoke, I mentioned the fact that even the war, the Ukrainian war, can be used as propaganda, and pictures and short films of Ukrainian people acting in racist ways towards black people trying to leave the country have circulated. And I said, it's easy for that to, you've got to ask yourself who's promoting that and why. But the truth is, it also speaks to the fact, doesn't it, is that we all struggle with various things. And of course, amongst the Ukrainian people, just like the British people, racism exists. How do we reach a place, Valerie, in life where we're motivated by an inclusive love for others, even when perhaps we don't experience that from them? Has that been something that you've dealt with?
So, Steve, I think this is really difficult, because, you know, this is about power. You know, essentially it's about power, and it is about who has the power to stymie opportunities for groups of people in our society. Now, you know, if the people who are discriminated against created a strong coalition, then they become immensely powerful. And the things that we could do together are not just potentially transformational, they are transformational. So of course, the starting point is always divide and rule. And if you look at, I was talking to a friend of mine who has been out of the UK for the last 10 years, working in the US. And he said, Britain has changed in the 10 years since I was here. But the thing that he put at the top of the agenda was it felt more divisive. And I think that's true for a whole range of reasons. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been, economic progress or you can't look at various things, but the ways in which we relate to each other feel much, much more divisive now than at various moments in our history. And I'm not saying there hasn't been division before, I'm not saying there haven't been improvements and so on, but I think the experiences of the last few years, the kind of culture wars, the way that, do we stay or do we come out of the European Union, the way that that debate was promulgated, all of those things, how we talk about the levelling up agenda, how we talk about race and people actually saying, well, we're a post-race society, these sorts of, all of these things, pitching young people against older people, all of these things have created much bigger divisions in our society. So I think, people are trying to push back against something which is much bigger. And what social media has done is made it possible for us just to live in a world, even though it's opened up the world to us. We've got greater access now to more knowledge than we've ever had. It has also opened up much greater access to, fake news or using what are minority incidents to blow them up to become majority incidents. I mean, you talked about Ukraine. It's been, on one level, I am absolutely horrified by what's going on. It brings back all the memories of when I worked at the UN, worked on humanitarian issues, saw the destruction of Syria, that, saw what's happening in places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo and so on. I mean, conflict has never left us. At the same time, I have been very conscious of what the Russian people have been told about what is going on in Ukraine. And the huge amount of, fake news that they have had to confront, which has meant that, they are not necessarily challenging their government because actually they think something completely different is going on. And, President Putin has actually used the word, Nazi in relation to the president of Ukraine, who's Jewish. I mean, so I think we have to get away from this notion that we're all going to love each other. I don't think that that is the issue. We're always going to have people that we do not like. The issue is about power and how that power is used and distributed and how it's used to keep people down. That's what we've got to confront.
That's really helpful. From your experience though, Valerie, there's ways of winning people and ways of losing them, aren't there? There's ways of pushing forward a cause that needs to be campaigned for, and ways that achieve the reverse. I'm sure you've seen that in the diplomacy that you've been involved with within the UN, for instance. How do we push forward these issues without being written off as a bunch of angry people in the corner?
Well, there were, some of us will always be a group of angry people in the corner. I mean, the approach that I've always taken, and I've chosen, as it were, to work inside organizations to bring about change. And one of the reasons I've done that is because I think you need to have people inside who are tapping into the anger that is outside. I think you need all of it. I think the anger is really, really important because it's about saying the change isn't fast enough. We're feeling it. So my experience growing up is very different to our young people today. They're more impatient. I like that. I think they have every right to be more impatient because the change has been way too slow. So I think we need different forms of organization and campaigning, and we need to tap into that to bring about the change. There are some people that will say, if you don't take everyone with, then the change has never happened. We're never going to take everyone with, and we have to accept that. Very often what you have to do is discount 10% on one that way, 10% that way, and you try to go with the 80%, the 60% that you can help to see how the difference is going to make the world a better place.
You work to win the people that are winnable.
Yeah, but you also acknowledge that most people are winnable, actually. I don't think your starting point is necessarily most people aren't winnable.
As you've listened to the commentary on the Ukraine, first of all, how does it make you feel? And then a second question, how do we respond to the fact that, we've heard, haven't we? Just this morning, I heard someone saying again, these are people in Europe. These are white European people. These are people who've got Netflix accounts. So we see what's happening, that the racism creeps out, doesn't it? Even through the commentary on what's happening. How do we respond to that kind of thing every day?
Well, I think first of all, we call it out, which I think people have been doing. So you force the commentators and others to actually take a good, long, hard look at themselves as to why they are actually reporting the conflict in that way. I mean, is it acceptable that you've had years of bombing, years of war, years of conflict in places like Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan? No, it's not. That we saw the huge impact of conflict in Libya, for example. This is not acceptable. And I think one of the things that I think is in a way positive out of this is that there has been that recognition that some of the reporting and it's ordinary people putting this on social media. They're horrified by it. I think that is a huge improvement, actually, because it's demonstrating to people across the world that there are some things that we share and recognize, and that is broader than it has been in the past.
How do you think, Valerie, last question here from me, how do you think then, going back to where we started, you're saying we need a broad and rich curriculum, a curriculum that, of course, isn't detached from reality around us for every child, not only in primary and secondary school, but for every student in university now. The world is a worrying place, isn't it? How do we respond to the issues around us, making progress in breaking the cycle of racism through what's going on at the moment? And have you seen good examples of that?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is challenge this notion that if you want to change the curriculum, if you want to make it more inclusive, if you want to add in, historians of color, scientists of color, you want to make it richer and more accurate in terms of our history, that somehow that is about taking away rather than adding. I mean, it speaks to a degree of defensiveness and lack of confidence if, as somebody that is committed to knowledge and learning and challenge, you can't see the benefits of a broader based curriculum that enables our young people to really engage with the depth, the richness, and quite frankly, the darkness, some of the darkness of our history. We can't pretend it wasn't there.
So then the question is, how do we move forward? A practical example, Oasis itself, we have 8 schools in the city of Bristol. The statue of Edward Colston was thrown into the harbour. It was then fished out. Those who threw it into the harbour were put on trial. They were found not guilty. There's a huge controversy around this. How do you embed that into the curriculum in a constructive way that leads us forward? In the city of Bristol, whether you're 5 or 18, this is something you're concerned about and you're hearing from your parents about. How do we mold that kind of event into a curriculum that equips young people for the future?
I think I'd say 2 things. I think one is about the history and the Colston history and where the money came from, what he did to acquire it, you know, who was abused in that process. And then the use of philanthropy as a way almost of trying to erase that history. Then there are questions that come from that, you know, some really significant questions for us as a society, which are around how does that money then get used, and coming to the sort of here and now. And I think I said that one of the things, I said it in a very old-fashioned way, is that I think there should be more civic education, as it were. You know, it is a debate and a discussion that we should be having in our schools. It should be included in the curriculum, which is, you know, who do we put on a pedestal and why? I think that, you know, as a society, we have to recognize that our heroes, our sheroes, our leaders, these are not perfect human beings. That there are different ways. So Britain, for example, looks at the Churchill legacy in one way. When you go to South Asia, the Churchill legacy is looked at in a different way. It's not that either one of those isn't rooted in the history. It is. Let's look at why 2 nations, 3 nations look at what appears to be the same legacy in a different way. You know, I always think about it in the context of the statues in Trafalgar Square. It's almost as if they come from different periods of time, but it's almost as if they're having a conversation. Because you have in Trafalgar Square, you know, a statue of a suffragette. You have in Trafalgar Square those who argued against women's suffrage. You have in Trafalgar Square, you know, Nelson Mandela, you know, who was, you know, who is a hero to many of us, but to others wasn't even seen as a freedom fighter, was seen as a terrorist. So there is if you just look at the kind of conversation that could be being had by a group of statues that represent different historical moments, I think it teaches our young people something.
Right.
So for me, it's about the recognition that yes, there are different perspectives here, and there are reasons for that, but it doesn't in any way negate another perspective.
That's fantastic, that conversation. I've said twice now, the last question. This really is the last question. Martin Luther.
This is the 3rd time you're saying last question.
Yeah, exactly. Martin Luther King famously said that the arc of all history bends towards justice. Is that true, or is that just wishful thinking?
Oh, I don't think it's wishful thinking. I think, look at the way that, you mentioned Colston. Look at the way that we reevaluating the Colston legacy. Look at the way that we are reevaluating the Rhodes legacy, for example. Look at the way right now there is work ongoing about, in the future, who will be put on trial in the context of the war with Ukraine in terms of human rights abuses. Look at, how that happened in the context of that brutal war in Liberia and people being brought to justice at a later stage. So it doesn't necessarily happen in our lifetime, but I think that reevaluation and that move towards justice, I don't think it happens on every occasion, but I think that there is more than a degree of truth in that.
Valerie, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. That's been inspirational. Thanks for carving out some time in what I know must be a very busy day for you, just to be with us. The things you've said to us, we carry through our day, we'll discuss and talk more about, and it will result in action in lots of places. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Steve, and good luck.
Thank you.